Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today at Oceania Catholic Homeschooler, and thank you especially to Ben for being available and being willing to share your experience and your wisdom with us. Ben is the founder and director of Augustine Academy Australia. So Ben, to start off with, please could you tell us a little bit more about Augustine Academy?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Anastasia. It's a privilege. So, as you said, founder and director of Augustine Academy. I founded Augustine Academy in 2016 after having completed liberal arts studies and gone on to do my master's. I thought, well, it's time to, give back some of the education that's been so formative to me. Uh, 2016 was the inaugural year, and we've been operating now for the last 10 years and had hundreds of students from all across Australia. I think there's not a state in Australia that we haven't got quite a number of students from. And as of last year, we've started to get a few New Zealander students. So it's been quite an adventure the last decade.
Wow, what subjects do you teach at Augustine?
Yeah, so the core subjects we teach theology, philosophy, history, and literature. In addition to that, the students learn public speaking, debating, grammar, logic, rhetoric, do drama. Uh, they're the academic subjects. On top of that, they've got more, outdoor subjects you could call them. The students learn agricultural skills and get involved in a lot of different farm projects, a lot of outdoor education. And so, yeah, that's kind of a brief overview of the subjects.
Wow. And so, what would you say is the main, I suppose, purpose or what the students come to Augustine for and what they get out of it?
Yeah, good question. I think the answer would be different for every single student. And certainly some students are drawn to Augustine Academy because it fits uh, I guess we've got a lot of outdoor education. So it's the really outgoing adventure students like I want to go to Augustine Academy because I'm going to get to have some fantastic adventures. Some are less keen on the adventures and more just very very interested in the classical education that it offers. And then some love both. And so I think it's very dependent upon the student, but it definitely attracts students who are, I guess, so we've got a high demographic of homeschoolers. I'd say 80 to 90% of the students are previously homeschooled, and most of them have come from a classical education, and so they're wanting to continue on their education beyond the parameters of what's possible, open to them or available to them at home. And so they're like, okay, well, I'm kind of getting to year 11, year 12. I'm wanting to do a year of classical education that's got the same pedagogy that is at home, perhaps not yet old enough or ready for university. Augustine Academy really features as a stepping stone for many students who are wanting to segue from their schooling to their tertiary studies and do so in a context that is wholesome, where their faith will be supported and where they'll be around peers that are like-minded.
Wow. And would you say that there's a connection between classical education and being formed in the faith? And do they tie into each other, or
Oh,
does classical education help form people in the faith?
that's a good question. Does classical education help you form you in the faith? Yes, I would say, uh, yeah, I would be, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's been I can say so for two reasons, both of which are empirical. It's done nothing but strengthen my own personal faith, and it's certainly, witnessing the students who come through Augustine Academy, it seems to have matured them in their faith, made them have a deeper, richer faith with a more sophisticated understanding of, the nuances of Catholicism. And so my experience in the students seem to, both agree that it is a nothing but a addition, and that kind of that kind of history kind of supports that. You look at the great times in the history is when classical education. I think classical education helps the faith. It also helps with keeping sanity amongst the world of chaos.
Wow. Mm. Can you tell us a bit more about either like a bit of the background, either historical background of classical education or just one or two simple reasons of like why is it better than I suppose the education that's kind of the easiest to go out and get, which is the modern one, which is available in all the public schools.
Yeah, well, I think to contrast classical education with modern education, you need to probably give some definition to classical education, and that's not something that's easily done. And I'm not, even though I'm not going to say I'm the expert on defining the concept, but I mean, you can't go wrong by at least saying that a salient feature of a classical education, and this is kind of a bit of a circular argument, a circular definition, but you got to look at the classics if you're going to do a classical education. You can't you restrict your reading to books that have been published in the last century and think that that's going to be sufficient. So, it's necessary to be familiar with the classics. For classical education, you need to kind of not be, I think, just selectively looking at, we'll just look at ancient history and modern history and skip everything else. Like, well, no, you've got to be less selective and look at the whole of history. And even with that, there's a lovely quote by Goethe, and he talks about, he makes the proposition that if you can't view history's 3,000 years, if your vision doesn't cover that, then you must, he says, live in utter darkness and live within the day's frontiers. And I think all that he means by that is, your insights or your perception of life is directly determined by how broad your horizon is, and the problems of today can't be properly understood without the correct perspective, and just the last 2 centuries isn't sufficient. So that's kind of a good, I think, response to what's the point studying ancient history, and that's something I'm going to be teaching to the students in a few weeks. We're going to be looking at the Mycenaean civilization, the Minoan civilization, the early Greek civilization, Roman civilization, and the question is like, well, what's the point looking at that far back? But I think it's absolutely indispensable. It gives you the perspective. But yeah, back to the question of what's the difference of a classical education to a modern one. Look, I think that you could say, a classical education, what's its purpose? Well, it's aimed to make you a critical thinker. Unfortunately, much modern education today seems to be almost like, in World War One and Two, propaganda was really weaponized, and I feel that education has been weaponized to promote certain ideologies that I don't frankly align with much at all. And so I guess rather than using education as propaganda to further views that are questionable, to say the least, and the agenda of a classical education is to make you a critical thinker, and regardless of your religious proclivity, that ought to be prized, valued, and sought after. And I think that it facilitates that. It's really trying to train you to be able to discriminate and use your right judgment and your reason, and just sort out the wheat from the chaff, so to speak.
Wow. Do you have any recommendations for specifically parents, but really anyone who wants to give someone else or who wants to get this really good classical education and learn how to critically think, but on a
Yeah,
position where it's really just not practical to take a year off and go travel far away to study or have other commitments or don't
yeah.
have a huge amount of
Well,
money resources?
yeah. No, look, the best education you could possibly get doesn't cost more than a few dollars, because books are unbelievably inexpensive, and you can get a very, very. I mean, even though I've spent close to 10 years at university, if you combine my undergraduate studies with all my postgraduate studies, I still could say that by far most of my learning, and what I even use most when I'm lecturing, is drawn from what I've read outside of the confines of the prescribed reading of university, but just my leisure reading and the different directions it's taken me has been, well, what do I enjoy reading? And I'm going to read that, and wow, that's quite applicable to what I'm lecturing on. So yeah, if you're disciplined enough and if your interests are already orientated in the right direction, then it doesn't have to be expensive to be getting a classical education. But for parents, I'd say pragmatically, the first step is they should get their child's phone if the child has a phone and throw it in the bin, or even better in the fireplace, or just make sure it's destroyed. There's not a single molecule left of that device. And then once that's gone, then to make sure there's really good books in your house. Don't like leave it up to your kid. If you want to make something a kid do something, you want to make it as easy as possible. So if you've got steak and Skittles both in the fridge, and the kid's going to eat Skittles most of the time, but if there's no Skittles and the kid's still hungry, then they might consider the steak. And I'd say that if you get rid of the phone, then and you've got plenty of classics littered throughout your house, and you give your kid the context where reading could be something that they consider, and they don't have the easier options, because you're always going to choose the path of least resistance. So when you're bored and you're wanting stimulation, you go on your phone, you go on your laptop. But if there's a book and nothing but the book, then perhaps you're going to actually pick the book up. And Aristotle says that he defines education as teaching a person to love the right things, and to learn that actually Shakespeare has more to offer than TikTok is a step in the right direction of what Aristotle would say education is, learning to love the right things. So that would be good. And then also knowing where your kid's at in terms of keeping them in their zone of proximal development. So in terms of zone of knowing your child well enough to keep them maximally in their zone of proximal development. And what I mean by that is, if your kid's 8 years old, don't give them Geoffrey Chaucer to read, because they're going to not give him. If they're an advanced 8-year-old, maybe wrote a little bit of Stevenson, but kind of go, okay, well, there's classics, but you need to gradate your child's reading to the appropriate degree of literacy for the given time. And so it doesn't mean you never read Shakespeare or Chaucer or Beowulf, but you read it at the right time, because your palate is something that needs to be developed, and you need to kind of be trained up to, and before you engage on the marathon, so to speak, of the great classics, you can build up to it with the ones that are aimed for younger readers. But I also just think that I've kind of got the same opinion with reading as I do with food. There's no point eating food if it gives you zero nutrient value. And so if there's, say, potato chips offer just nothing, there's nothing you get out of them. So just how about you only eat stuff that's actually going to energize you and facilitate your health? Your life's so short, so maybe just don't let yourself read rubbish. Maybe rather than reading bubblegum kind of brain material, only read stuff that is worth your attention and going to challenge you and going to expand your kind of capacity for critical thinking, because reading hard books develops your ability to grasp a broader horizon of concepts, and you want to kind of build up that strength so you can tackle the books that have formed society and transform society, but that won't happen overnight. So kind of you got to start training, so to speak.
Wow. And what would you say would be your top, say, your book recommendations, like top 2 books for, say, primary school age, and then like 2 or 3 books for high school age, and then a couple books for adults?
Oh, gee, that's really hard.
Well,
Hate
I
that
mean, it
question.
doesn't
I
have
don't
to
hate
just
the
be two,
questions.
but
Yeah. Look, I think in terms of for the younger tier, I think both Robert Louis Stevenson and also Sir Walter Scott, both of them write great works for. And really, like, I can't pin that to an exact age because it depends so much on me. But I'd say, like, if you're under 12 and you're wanting to read, good literature, then Charles Dickens, maybe Sir Walter Scott, and they're certainly good ones. But then also, like, there's if you want to kind of step down a little bit and challenge, you could read the Narnia Chronicles or something. That's kind of like a real entry point, but still good. For me, like, if in terms of what more high school, there's so many good ones, but a lot of them are just way too long. I mean, Les Miserables, that just yeah, I read that when I was about 17. That just blew my mind. I think that's a must read before you die kind of book. Um, oh, it's so hard to refine it. Like I think, yeah, it really depends on your interests as well, because there's some classics that are, transform other people's lives, but they're not necessarily yeah, because it's just such a subjective thing. Like there'd be books that I'd be recommending if a person has certain interests. Like I wouldn't necessarily even recommend Robert Louis Stevenson to female writers readers, because he explicitly says he's writing for, at least with Treasure Island, he says, I'm writing for my little nephew, I think it was, or his stepson, and so he's writing for a male audience. So that's kind of worth noting.
Okay. Well, those sound like really good authors. I think I might have read Treasure Island when I was younger and liked it. And
Oh,
so,
you did? Okay, okay.
and so, um, the other question is, if there was one thing you could say to every parent about, I suppose, specifically about educating kids, but just in general, what recommendation would you give?
Or I don't want to criticize the question. Can you make it a little bit more precise though? Because just what advice do you give to parents who want to educate their kids? Like can we give it a little
True.
bit more parameters? Because that's like,
It's
that's
a super broad, super broad question. Putting you on the spot. How about if you wanted to, how about in terms of helping your children love good literature?
yeah. Well, I think like that in part, with what I was saying before, making sure you're not, because I mean, yeah, if you give a book to a kid and it's way below or way above their degree of comprehension, then like you enjoy things when you're challenged but not overwhelmed, and so you really want to be kind of always reading stuff that is, yeah, pushing you into the outer frontier of your comprehension levels, and because we enjoy that. Like, it's no fun riding a bike with training wheels if you've mastered the training wheels. You want to get onto riding without the training wheels, and then maybe you want to get rid of the second wheel and start on the unicycle. And so you're wanting to be kind of always upscaling what you can read. It's like, well, I've read Charles Dickens, so why don't I try Tolstoy next? And like what, keep trying to ratchet that up. But then also being aware of your taste in literature. There's even a well-read student still has preferences, and so talk to someone who's better read than you and say, hey, these are kind of some of the books that I've really enjoyed reading. This author, this author, and this author. Can you give me some recommendations of authors that I might enjoy, given the fact that I've enjoyed these ones previously? And then you're going to get hopefully some informed recommendations that can facilitate an increased capacity for reading. So that could be good. It also is just something that it's a habit that needs to be developed. And again, to reiterate, like it's just the biggest impediment to the development of a healthy habit of reading is any technology. I'm not wanting to hate on technology. It is a temptation that there's so many students who've come to Augustine Academy and said, "Oh, I was a great reader until I got a smartphone, and now I've completely dropped the habit." And I'm like, "Oh, that's awful." So that'd be two bits of advice I'd say.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think those are very, very good, solid pieces of advice. How about advice for, because you've seen so many students, advice for homeschooling students in terms of study, or just general study tips, specifically in terms of um, studying to do well and give myself a good education and also do well on assessments.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of study habits, I think that knowing knowing yourself really well in terms of when am I engaged maximally in the task at hand, because uh, people waste a lot of time studying by not knowing when their actual attention span is exhausted, and rather than going and having a break and coming back refreshed, like, oh, I'm starting to feel a little bit not attentive, or maybe I'm just looking for an easy dopamine hit and I want some distraction, so I'll just watch a bit of YouTube and then like I like make your study efficient. So, um, yeah, like my wife and I were both in the habit of getting up at about 4:30 or 5 o'clock each morning and getting into study after prayer, and that's partly necessitated because come 6 a.m. both our kids are awake, and so study becomes hard after that. But even if you don't have kids, I think that you got to recognize two things. How long can I study for before I need a break? And go, okay, well, I can study for 60 minutes. And after that, attention span starts to drop. There's no point studying after the 60 minutes. Just go and have a 10-minute break and then come back and then go, then lock in again and go, it'll be high attention. And make your break also productive if you're wanting to be super efficient with your time. So like I tend to study really hard for the period of time that I can, and then go and do a productive thing that is completely and utterly different. Like I think it's the most futile thing in ever if you're having to read some text on your laptop. If your break then is doing something on the laptop as well, that's just blithering stupid. You need to get off the laptop, close the darn device, and do something outside, and that's really, really physically active, because you just kind of come back more refreshed from doing that. So, having breaks that are completely different from the reading activity, it's engaging with a different part of your mind, and also knowing when you're most alert. And so there's exceptions to the rule, but most people are more alert in the morning, as they do your hard intellectual activity in the morning. If you have a bit of a slump in your intellectual kind of capabilities in the early afternoon, then maybe don't make that the time when you're going to be trying to start an essay. Knowing your times that you're most alert and vigilant and attentive, and knowing your attention span, and working within both of those rather than being utterly unaware, and just kind of going, well, I'll just, blindly kind of crawl forward without any kind of game plan.
Okay, so pretty much know your weaknesses and then know your strengths. And
Yeah, but it's not even. I don't even think so. It's not a weakness to be more alert in the morning. It's not a weakness to have a 60-minute attention span. It's just like that's just self knowledge, and you got to work around I'd call them parameters of capability rather than a weakness. And if you've got a 15-minute attention span, well, main one then that might be kind of problematic. But you can still work within that, and you probably can't go, well, I'm going to have an hour break if I've done a 15 minutes of study. Like, you don't earn an hour break from 15-minute study. You might earn a 2-minute break and then come back to it. So, yeah. And then it's also, I don't know whether it's, this may not be helpful, but if you're a competitive person and wanting to beat your PB, then go, okay, well, I'm going to be self-aware and figure out when I start zoning out. And it is a gratifying thing to notice that initially maybe no one else finds, but I found it gratifying to go, oh, I used to only be able to be attentive for 60 minutes. Now I can be attentive for 70 minutes. And now, and noting kind of, is the duration of your attention expanding? Because that's a really handy thing, because your motivation is directly determined by your observation of the progress you're making towards a goal. So if you've got a goal that you want to be well-read or academic or scholarly or whatever, then if you can have markers that you can observe and go, hey, man, I just read a 100-page book. It only took me a day and a half. Like, that's heaps better than 6 months ago. I'm motivated to continue with this endeavor, because every time you have these successes and you observe the success, because progress is observable, you've got an increase of serotonin, which is directly linked to motivational levels. And so it's a huge, like, motivation is a massive component of high performance with your studies. And so you can't feel motivated unless you see progress, and you can't see progress until you've got markers. So maybe just see how long it takes you to finish reading 20 pages, or how long you can write before you get distracted, and see if those change in a positive direction, and feel motivated if they do, and not discouraged if they don't, because you're human.
Thank you. I'm going to use some of those tips in my own study. I already usually do 4:30 a.m. wake up to study, but I should try some of the other ones. But anyway,
Good on you. Good on you.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming and taking the time to share your experience and your knowledge
No problem.
with us.
No, pleasure.
Thank you to everyone watching.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you.